Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of Unfeigned the podcast. I'm Jay, I'll be your host. And just want to let you know this first episode might be a little different than the rest because I want to give you some history, a bit of a backstory, tell you a little bit about why I'm doing this, and sort of like the vision for Unfeigned the podcast. It's fitting, as a side note, it's fitting. I'm actually recording this first episode while I'm sitting in my car, and I'm I'm parked at a place where a lot of my life took place, um, especially when over my kids' lives, and we just did a lot of things here, and it's a pretty cool scene. We got some snow falling, and in North Carolina, that's where I'm at. That's a big deal, but that was just a side note. But it's kind of setting the mood for this first episode, which is pretty cool. Well, let me give you a little bit of a backstory, a little bit of history. Let me start with the vision first. So, Unfeigned the podcast isn't necessarily um, like where you would come to listen to get like a 12-step program, or you know, um, it's a self-help type thing. I I want Unfeigned the podcast to be for people, to let people know that you're not alone, right? I listen to a lot of podcasts, and a lot of the podcasts that I listen to are from people who, and maybe they don't want it to be this way necessarily, but by the nature of their story, they seem to be a little bit on a different level. Sort of kind of they've arrived, or they've made it through the other end, and they're over there and we're over here, and I'm not saying that's the case for every podcast, and I'm not saying anything bad about the people that are recording these podcasts, because I love them. But the vision for Unfeigned the podcast is to connect with people, to create this community or culture of people that are all sort of, pardon my French, like sitting in their shit. Um, I have come out on the other side of many things over my life, right? I've been redeemed from many things. I've recovered from many things. I've grown and I've matured through many things. However, life is still life, and it's still throwing stuff my way, and so I'm still in it, right? And I want Unfeigned the podcast to be a bit of a raw, unscripted version of my story, and I hope that anyone who's listening, uh, maybe for yourself or maybe somebody uh, maybe going through something, or has gone through something, or might even foresee that they may be dealing with some things in the future, and be able to understand that they're not alone, that someone else is at least going through similar things, similar trials, and hopefully my story and how I'm sort of dealing with things, or how I've come out on the other end of some things, and maybe that'll help somebody. So that's sort of the vision. It's just, the us quote unquote regular folk, uh, and I'm telling my story, and I'm hoping that it can benefit somebody that's listening. Um, but really, I just want to let y'all know I'm in it with you, and I'm here. Um, I'm not on a different level. I'm not over there and you're over here, and so I just want to put that out there, that I'm hoping that this creates this sense of community, where we're all dealing with life's shit, right? And I actually recorded over 100 episodes, and the plan was to release the podcast, right? And it was for Unfeigned, the podcast, and this was over the last 2 years or so. And I recorded over 100 episodes with the purpose of releasing all those episodes, and releasing a podcast with all these episodes already recorded. And it was at the time that I was going to release the podcast, and it hit me that, and I'm going to get into more of my story, definitely on other episodes, but a little bit here. Excuse me. Um, it hit me that most of those episodes, probably 95% of those episodes, were extremely therapeutic for me. It was part of my healing. And it was as if I was sitting face to face with a counselor and I was just kind of letting everything spew out of my mouth, right? I was just unloading. Um, and I wasn't with a counselor, it was with my microphone, but those episodes became uh, a lot of me letting all the hurt out and the pain out. And um, it was extremely raw. And it was, like I said, very therapeutic for me. But I didn't really know if it would benefit someone, right? Or if it was just me ranting, or me needing to get stuff out. I didn't necessarily know if it was appropriate for a podcast. All that being said, I decided to archive all those episodes. And I want my story, excuse me, I want to talk about my story, not just from the perspective of me healing and it being therapeutic and me getting stuff out per se. I want to tell my story so that I can help people, because someone might be going through the same thing I'm going through, or somebody might be going through what I did go through. And my story involves, excuse me, my story involves a lot of pain and hurt and regret and shame and guilt. There's some really good things in my story. Also, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be like a martyr here or act like Eeyore or anything. So there was a lot of good over my life, a lot of things to celebrate. But there were definitely times of trial and pain and even, in more recent years, a lot of regret and shame from my choices and my actions and the people that I've hurt. And so I want my story um, to go into that. I'm going to go into a lot of the details and things like that, but I want it to help someone else who might feel like they're wandering or maybe looking for some answers, or just want to understand it's okay to not be okay. And how do you walk in that? I've been healed from many things. God has redeemed me from many things. And so how do you walk in that? What does that look like? How did I get here? All those kinds of things. And hopefully it can help somebody. I'd love to hear from y'all too. I'll probably figure out how to get my contact information up on Spotify or on this podcast or something like that. But I would love to hear from y'all. Part of my vision for this podcast is to actually have some people on so that I can talk to them about their story and, we can go back and forth with each other. But so all of that being said, I want to take the rest of the time, and I don't want these episodes to be very long. I want to value your time, and I want to keep y'all engaged. So with the rest of the time, I want to share a little bit about me and my story. So from a young age, as is with all of us, from a young age, my perspective on life, my perspective on who I am, all of those things, were formed. And something that marked my life was this need for applause, right? So I needed to be the best, right? And so it was very performance driven. And over the course of my life in those very formidable years, the young ages, even into the teens, and it was all marked by how I appeared to other people, and regardless of what it was. And so I needed to be the best. And it was all about my performance. And if I was doing well at something, and you can fill in the blank, if I was doing well, it felt good, right? And I was in people's good graces, and I felt like I mattered, and I felt like, the man, right? But if I wasn't doing well, if I quote unquote messed up, right? Or if I wasn't the best at something, then, excuse me, I felt like I was unworthy, right? I felt like I was less than. And that influenced my decisions and my choices on how to get back to feeling that way, how to get back to feeling like the man, right? And there were outside pressures as well. I mean, it's, and I'm not making it into a thing, but you have pressures from your family and your friends and your classmates, your teammates, relationships, the people that are involved in your life, and you get this outside pressure, some more than others, and the pressure to perform or the pressure to be the best or the pressure to not mess up is greater for some and less for others. But for me, there was a lot of pressure, and I put a lot of that on myself as well. But I did have some outside pressure from family, friends, things like that to perform. And so I started to form this perspective of life. And what happens then is I didn't ever want to feel that I wasn't the best or that I wasn't, quote unquote, the man, right? And so my decisions were they started to become like centered around this idea of I want everybody to think I'm the man. And it wasn't necessarily that I needed everybody to like me. Okay. It wasn't really that I was trying to um, please everyone. Maybe in some level, but more it was about wanting the standing ovation when I walk into the room. Like I want everybody to think, wow, like that's Jay, right? And that's messed up, right? That's broken. That's pretty screwed up. That's a screwed up perspective. That's a broken perspective of life and of me, of myself, right? But it does definitely influences decisions and choices and behaviors, right? And so, as I'm growing up, I'm kind of figuring out who I am, figuring out life, and there was something that happened in my life in high school, and maybe on another episode I'll get into it, but there was something that happened in high school, early on in high school, probably sophomore, junior year, somewhere around there, and I had my heart broken, right? I used to be like this hopeless romantic, right? Way back in the day. Okay, this is a long time ago. But I used to be like this hopeless romantic, right? I used to write poetry and, it's fun stuff. Well, I wrote a poem for a girl, and looking back, it was. I mean, it was cute, right? You write a poem for somebody, but I mean, it was kind of delusional a little bit. I don't even think we knew each other that well, but so I wrote this poem for this girl, and I thought it was great, right? I'm like spilling my heart on the paper, and I'm gonna give it to her, and she's gonna like fall in love with it and be like, yes, whatever. So I gave her the poem, and she says, she looks at me, and she looks at the poem. She says, "This is the stupidest thing that I've ever read." Now, I'm not saying that for anybody to feel sorry for me, okay? But at that moment, my heart was broke, and um, I decided. I think I went into it with this perspective of I want to feel like the man, right? I want her to make me feel like I'm the man, and I didn't. My heart was broken. I vowed that day, right? I committed to myself that I would never feel that way again, and that's important. That's an important pivotal moment in my life. Okay, that's probably like sophomore in high school, I guess, somewhere or other. But that's a pivotal moment in my life that I remember vividly because it changed the trajectory of my life. So I made a vow. I committed to myself that I would never feel that way again. I didn't want to feel that kind of hurt. And so I was going to now make decisions and choices and act in ways that would not allow me to feel that kind of pain. Unfortunately, it took behaving in the opposite extreme because now I was doing things that I felt like I could control and feel like the man. And unfortunately, that meant that I ended up hurting a lot of people, right? I ended up with my broken perspective now and living out of this commitment that I'll never feel this pain and this hurt again. I started to do things that hurt a lot of people. And as a side note, at this point in my life, I wasn't a Christian. I wasn't like faith was not an important thing in my life, and God was not an important thing in my life. Now, I went to church here and there, but nothing ever changed me. And so I didn't have that in my life. And so there wasn't anything to like judge it against, right? So it was just me and whatever I felt was right. Well, so for the next several years and years and years, I'm behaving in such a way that I'm not going to feel this kind of pain. And I'm going to create scenarios. I'm going to create situations that I think, looking back, I understand that it was a false sense of control. But at the time, I was trying to create situations that gave me this sense of control. And I was going to control it so that I felt like the man, right? Because that would avoid the pain of being hurt or having my heart broken, or things like that. So that became how I behaved, the choices I made, the decisions I made going forward for a very long time. So fast forward, right? And this podcast is not about, hey, what was Jay's life like when he was in high school and college, but we're gonna fast forward to my marriage, right? And so I brought a lot of these things, these ideas, this perspective. I brought a lot of this into my marriage, and I'm not going to go over the details of my marriage. Maybe on another episode, probably on another episode, we'll get into stuff. But for this episode, I just want to say that I came into my marriage broken. Right now, we're all broken in some sense. Okay, we're all broken in some sense. When I graduated college, we're going to backtrack a little bit. When I graduated college, I have had, I graduated in 1999. So what was I, 23 or something? So I had 23 years of hearing about faith, and I mean, obviously not every day, but and not every year, but I knew of God's name, I knew of church, I knew of the Bible, I knew of things, and I had spent 4.5 years in college, not being a Christian, and I was at a Christian university, which was interesting. And it's funny because anybody that's listening to this that knows me, may or may not be surprised with this. I don't know, but I wasn't a Christian when I was in college, and I faked it really well. But it was a big struggle for me, and we'll get into that in another episode. But I wasn't a Christian. I was at a Christian college, and I had heard a lot of the same things over and over and over for 4.5 years, and I had many people sort of, quote unquote, witnessing to me. And I will tell a story of how Jesus grabbed hold of me, right? So 4.5 years, I'm getting ready to graduate, and there was a very, very pivotal moment in college that could have changed my life forever, in a different direction, in a not so good direction. And I just kind of remembered back to someone told me once when I was in college, they said, you got to let God hug you, right? And they'd said other things, but that was something that stood out to me because it sounded so stupid, right? At that moment, I didn't know. I knew of God. I knew where they said God was. I'd look up and he's up in the sky somewhere. That's supposedly heaven. And they were telling me, let God give me a hug. So I'm like, okay, first of all, it doesn't make any sense because God's like way up there and he's not even like a person, right? How's he going to give me a hug? But I'm like, all right, whatever. At this point, this event happened in my life, and I knew at that moment, like, if I kept going the way I'm going, I'm either going to end up dead or in jail or I don't know, whatever. So I was like, all right, I'm going to test his theory. I'm going to see if God will give me a hug, right? So I drove to this park, got out of my car. I looked up to where they said heaven was, or where they said God was. And so I just kind of said out loud, okay, God, give me a hug. And I think I might have waited like 30 seconds. Like, first of all, how arrogant am I, right? But that's besides the point. So I'm standing there for like 30 seconds, and then I get back in my car, and I remember saying out loud, that's what I thought. And so I drive back to campus, and at that moment, I'm like, okay, well, like how? What is it? Like, how do I even pursue this? If it seems like you telling me to tell God to give me a hug. I told him to give me a hug. He didn't come down and give me a hug. So is this all fake? Like what? So now I'm wrestling with all this stuff, right? Well, I remember another event where, I actually woke up in somebody's bathtub, and I don't remember how I got there. And it was at that moment where I was like, "Okay, fine." And I remember driving back to that same spot in the park, and this time I didn't get out and ask God to give me a hug. I got out and I literally just said, "If you are who they say you are, then prove it." And at that moment, I felt like something happened. And there's some evidences that we can get into another podcast, but something happened. And I knew that this was something to pursue now. I knew this was real. And I knew Jesus had touched me right there. And I don't know if I was saved. I don't know if I became a Christian at that moment. I used to say that I did. I used to say that was the moment I got saved or that I surrendered my life to Christ or whatever. The the events that happened over the next several years, even decades, right, would probably prove otherwise, but I don't know. But anyway, I know Jesus did something to me that day. And so now, I'm wrestling with this. I know I'm different. I know I felt something different, right? But I'm still engaged in the destructive behavior that I was engaged in. And so now I bring this into my marriage, and obviously that doesn't make for a healthy marriage. And throughout my marriage, my choices, my behaviors, my actions played a very big part in the destruction of my marriage, right? And so for those of you that don't know, I am divorced, and it was probably about 2 years ago. But I am divorced, and my choices and my actions and my behaviors played a pivotal role in the destruction of my marriage. Now, let me say this. There are always two sides, right? So, my ex-wife also had a part in the destruction of our marriage. So, there is that. Now, what I will say is, though, my behavior and choices and actions were um, a lot more destructive. Okay, and if I had made different choices, if I had made different decisions, if I had acted differently, if I thought differently, if I behaved differently, I might still be married to my ex-wife. Or yeah. Um, but because of that, so all right, we'll go back to the marriage. I brought all of that into my marriage, this brokenness, this broken perspective. I hadn't healed from anything really. I had an addiction to pornography, and we'll get into that in another episode because um, I am now on the other side of it, healed from that, and I am excited to talk about my journey through that. But I had an addiction to pornography, and that I brought into my marriage, right? And so I had all this brokenness and all this warped perspective on relationship and life and who I was and who my wife was and how I'm supposed to treat her and who God was. And so all of it was broken. And bring this in my marriage, and it played a huge part in the destruction of my marriage. And we're going to fast forward a little bit because, like I said, this first episode is going to be a little different, but we're going to fast forward a little bit. Over the last 2 years, and you'll get to know that I don't like cliches, right? But sometimes they're appropriate. And the cliche of saying, I am a much different person now than I was back then is extremely appropriate. So over the last 2 years, my journey of healing and growth and redemption has been a very long one, a very long one. I'm not going to get into it all in this episode. That's going to launch into the next episode. We're going to start to unpack some of these things, but over the last 2 years, my journey, while it has been healing and growth and maturity and redemption and restoration, and while it has involved all of that, it's been long, it's been hard, painful, very sharpening. It's still not over. I'm still in the midst of some things that make life tough and painful. And over the last 2 years, my story, it has involved homelessness. Um, it's involved jail. It's involved broken relationships. Um, it's involved, now I'll say this, during that time, I never attempted to take my own life. I never attempted that. And I never got to the point where I thought I'm going to do it, but I got pretty close. And the only thing that I think kept me from crossing the line, and not necessarily doing it, but making the decision in my head that I wanted to do it, were my kids. And so my story involved homelessness, jail, this getting close to this line of suicide. It involved a lot of guilt and shame and regret and hopelessness and wandering. Many nights and days and nights of crying, just the unknown. And so, but all of that was part of the last 2 years. All of that was part of my growth and my healing. And there was a moment of, it was such a beautiful moment of surrender. And we're going to talk about all this stuff. And I'm going to leave us with this. This is leading into the next set of episodes. But in the midst of all that, here's what I believe. I believe that, yes, God is sovereign. He is sovereign over all. Nothing that happens actually happens apart from God, right? So he has his hand in everything. Nothing can happen without the permission of God. And so if that's true, if I believe that, if I actually believe that God is sovereign, then he is in my story, right? He is in that story, the hardest, the darkest moments of my life over the last 2 years, the darkest places. I believed I was standing at the gates of hell. And even in that, God was in my story, right? I have to believe that if I believe God is who he says, who he claims to be. And I believe two things: that I don't believe that Jesus is saying, hey, I'm over there and just come to me. I don't believe that. I don't believe he's standing in the distance and wanting us to come to him and beckoning for us to come to him. I don't believe that. What I believe is that he's right there with us. He's in it. He's in the darkest place with me. And he's there, and all I need to do is turn my head right to him. He's not off in the distance. He's in it with me. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I believe God is sovereign. And so, yes, I believe that he ordained marriage, right? I believe that he brought my ex-wife and I together, and that his hand was in our marriage, right? And he set up that marriage. Excuse me. And he entrusted that marriage to us, and I blew it, right? I decided to do with that marriage, the marriage he gave me, to do with it what I pleased. And it led to the destruction. But God didn't say, okay, you're done. He said, now I have something else for you. I had that for you, and you threw it away. But now I have something else for you. And I believe that over the last 2 years, which is going to mark a lot of this podcast, I believe that God knew that I would not get here on my own. Today, as I'm recording this podcast, I am a much different person. Some people that know me today, would not recognize me. So, but to get here, I believe that God knew I wouldn't come here on my own. I wouldn't choose to get here on my own. And so what did God have to do? And this is the love of God. This is the grace of God, right? And the long suffering of God. But what did God have to do? He had to come and get me. And I believe that God came and got me. And it looked like what the last 2 years of my life has looked like. And even what I'm going through right now, which we'll get into and then, in future episodes. But God had to come and get me. And today, as I'm recording this podcast, I can say that God has healed me from many things. And I've walked through the fire, and He's healed me from many things. And my perspective regarding a lot of things is very different than it was just 2 years prior. So y'all, I want to thank you for listening. I mean, this is exciting. And I just want to let you know, like, Unfeigned the podcast is going to be raw. It's going to be unscripted, unedited. I want that feel to come through. I want it to be real, right? For so long, I hid, right? And I just put forth what I wanted people to see, this image of me, and I hid behind this quote unquote mask. And I want Unfeigned the podcast to be transparent and vulnerable and honest. And that's going to come out in the unscripted, raw feel of this podcast. So y'all, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you will continue to listen. Remember to follow this podcast on Spotify. I'm going to say that I think you can get this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm not real sure of that, but if that's not the case now, I'm going to work on making that case in the future. But for now, you definitely can get it on Spotify. Remember to follow this podcast so that you don't ever miss an episode. And I'm going to work on getting my contact information up there. I would love for you to text me or email. And you know what? I don't know. If you know me, I like to make waves and stuff. So I don't even know if you're supposed to do this, but I'm going to put my phone number, my cell phone. So I would love to hear from you. Text me. Chances are, if I don't recognize the number, I probably won't answer the phone call, but text me at 704-284-7175. Again, text me, 704-284-7175. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk about your story. I'd love to maybe even someday have you on the podcast. Because remember, we're in this. I'm in this with you. We're in this, and I can learn from you, just like you can learn from me. And I'm hoping that we all can experience this growth and healing and restoration and redemption. But y'all, thank you so much. And until next time, I'll see you then.